Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go.
I will not forgive you. That was my first thought the moment I heard the slurred, breath-reeking voice on the other end of the line. It was just past midnight, and my phone blasted through the silence of my living room with an ugly, metallic ring. The voice belonged to someone who'd clearly had too much to drink. Words crashed into each other in a mess of confusion. "Mike, you gotta. She's gone. I saw. I'm sorry." I recognized the voice. Her sister, stumbling over every sentence, crying, babbling about Elizabeth Randall disappearing. Disappearing again. The same sister who'd spent the last few months dodging my calls, covering for Liz's strange absences. The same woman who would text me that everything was fine whenever I dared to ask if she knew what was going on. Now she was in tears, half apologizing, half accusing. I tried to keep my composure, even as the knuckles of my free hand turned white from gripping the arm of the couch. "Slow down," I said, my own voice barely above a growl. "Tell me exactly what's going on." She kept repeating that Elizabeth had left, and that I deserved better. That she was sorry for not warning me sooner. That she couldn't hold it in anymore. It was like listening to a half-broken record. Static and heartbreak, all in the same lonely tune. Finally, her phone must have slipped from her hand or gone dead, because the call cut off mid-sob. I stared at the screen. I had no intention of calling her back. I needed silence, needed a moment to gather my thoughts. The house was dark, except for the single lamp by the couch. I was still wearing the same shirt and tie I'd had on at work earlier, now disheveled after hours of tension, and half a bottle of scotch I'd drunk to numb my confusion. And beneath my breath, I repeated it. "I will not forgive you, Elizabeth Randall." 5 hours later, dawn hammered against the windows. I hadn't slept. Too many thoughts, too many images that shredded my composure. My wife, Elizabeth Randall, the same woman I'd known since she was a college graduate with big eyes and bigger ambitions, had left without explanation 8 months ago. She vanished overnight, took only her phone and a spare change of clothes, leaving behind a short, cryptic text. "I need time." It was the kind of note an acquaintance leaves, not a wife of 15 years. I remember how it felt then, like I was clinging to a sinking raft in the middle of a black ocean, searching for a flicker of light on the horizon. I told no one, not even my younger sister, who had her own life in another state, because in my mind, Elizabeth had to be going through something personal, maybe heartbreak I didn't know about. I told myself she'd come back, that we'd talk it through, that her father, my father-in-law, would come around, or that someone in her family would explain what was happening. But nothing. Her father, ironically, was in a nursing home because Elizabeth hadn't wanted to deal with his failing health at home. Her sister, yes, the same woman who had just called me in a drunken meltdown, had lied each time I asked for news, for clues. "She's fine," she'd say. "She just needs space, Mike." The neighbor, she saw something. I could tell from her evasive smile on the rare mornings we crossed paths taking out the trash. She never said a word. There was also a colleague at my office, Frank. He told me how he'd once been the victim of Elizabeth's sabotage, how she'd spread rumors to get him demoted, so she could climb faster in her career. Somehow, I'd overlooked that or justified it, thinking I knew her better, thinking she'd never do that to me. And now, all of them were swirling in my mind. The phone call, the stench of whiskey in her sister's voice, Elizabeth's betrayal growing more and more real with each passing second. I forced myself off the couch, took a long, punishingly cold shower, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Michael Randall, 45 years old, manager at a logistics company, short hair going gray near the temples, a little heavier than he'd like. The man who, for the last 15 years, believed in forever, believed that Elizabeth Randall was the best thing that ever happened to him. That entire reflection was trembling now with anger and a sorrow so heavy it almost snapped my spine. But above all, There was a bone-deep exhaustion, the feeling that I was, spiritually, already a dead man walking. My wife's coldness had turned me hollow from the inside out. She had left me, deserted me. And now, apparently, she was with him. I remembered that moment from 8 months ago, just before she walked out, how she'd stuffed her phone in her purse, looked me in the eye, and said with chilling calm, "I'm staying with my sister for a while. Don't follow me." No love, no warmth, not even anger. Just that bland indifference that cut deeper than any rage or tears ever could. I dried off, dressed in a rumpled shirt and jeans, and the day passed in a blur. No calls came, no messages. I sat in the living room, phone in hand, thinking about all the times I tried to reach her, only to get those curt, single-line responses, or worse yet, none at all. Then, late in the evening, a notification from social media. My phone lit up with a short alert that someone tagged me in a video, someone I didn't know. I opened it, and there it was. A TikTok. Nighttime. Recorded on my boat. The cheap boat I'd bought years ago for weekend fishing trips. The one place I'd always felt at peace. The camera panned across the deck, and a man's voice, low and dripping with smug confidence, said, making another man's wife very happy. I couldn't see their faces at first, only silhouettes, her delicate shape pressing against him, the slight arch of her spine. Elizabeth's voice was just barely audible. "This is perfect. We'll be together now, always." She sounded breathless, affectionate. A small laugh, private, intimate, something I hadn't heard from her in so long. It was a laugh that used to be mine. They shifted, and the camera angle changed. I saw the blanket I kept under the seats for chilly nights on the water, the same blanket that Elizabeth once used to wrap around me in one of our earlier trips. Now it was beneath her and this man, Thomas Rice, some younger videographer, their bodies pressed together, her head on his chest, the shape of her shoulders exposed. It wasn't pornographic, but it didn't need to be. Every second oozed betrayal and raw physical closeness. Elizabeth's moan, her whispered promise, her soft, "I love you." She'd never said it like that in a long time. Not to me. Then the camera turned. Lighting fell onto her face just enough to show that parted lip expression, a haze of passion in her eyes. The shot was shaky but real. No question. Elizabeth Randall was there, half-dressed, with Thomas Rice's arms around her, the night sky above them, the lapping of water, the hush of stolen pleasure. For a half-second, the lens captured his grin, and he repeated, making another man's wife happier than she's ever been. The video ended abruptly, then repeated. I stared at it, jaw clenched so tight I nearly cracked my teeth. My breath came in slow, ragged bursts. The heartbreak was immediate but numb at the same time. I replayed it once more, searching for any sign this was some twisted joke. But it wasn't. I recognized everything. The boat, the old blanket, the distant city lights on the water. They had the audacity to record their betrayal on my property with my boat under my sky. Then they posted it online, tagging me. A deliberate act to humiliate me in front of everyone. And Elizabeth wasn't even shielding her face. She wanted me to see. Or maybe she was too far gone into her new life to care about the consequences. I tried to speak but found no words. I just dropped my phone onto the coffee table, took a breath that felt like 1,000 needles in my lungs, and stared at nothing. The room seemed to spin. The house that Elizabeth once decorated with so much pride felt like a hollow stage set now. I stood up, paced in circles, my fists opening and closing as if they had a mind of their own. I had no tears. Possibly I had shed them all in the 8 months of confusion. What replaced them now was a slow, volcanic rage. But it wasn't the hot fury that shouts and breaks things. It was a cold, corrosive wrath. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you whisper through clenched teeth, "I will not forgive you, ever." Some part of me wanted to drive straight to wherever they were, confront them physically. But another part, The deeper, calmer, deadly part said, no, don't give them the satisfaction of an outburst. You can destroy them quietly. Let them see you standing tall, refusing to be the victim. Mute, unstoppable. I remembered, at that moment, the little packet of salt in my jacket pocket. It'd been there for years, from a time Elizabeth Randall had placed it in my hand with a laugh, whispering, "So you never forget. I'm always with you." It sounded silly back then, but she'd said it was symbolic. Salt, like tears, like truth, meant we were bound. Even now my mind conjured the memory of her bright smile, how she used to tease me about being too serious. Salt, tears, lies. I grabbed the jacket from the armchair, slipped my hand inside, and felt the small edges of that packet. I could almost hear her voice from years ago. Had it all been some twisted prophecy? I'm always with you. Now it felt like she cursed me. 3 days passed. I didn't watch the video again, but it spread. People I knew wrote me awkward messages, or phoned me with a forced sympathy. Some tried to be supportive, others were just curious. Gossip. I spoke briefly to my colleague Frank. He said, "I always felt she wanted more, you know. She's ambitious." Then he hesitated. "I'm sorry, man. I know it's none of my business, but I'm here if you need me." I thought of the times Elizabeth had manipulated the office environment to secure promotions. I'd overlooked it, wanting to believe she was simply driven. But in hindsight, the pattern was clear. She did what benefited her. Period. Then my sister called. She said, "Mike, come stay here if you want. Get away from Savannah. Please." But I declined, because I felt something building inside me. An unstoppable need to face Elizabeth, to confront what she'd done. The humiliation had fermented into a single-minded determination. And it wasn't just about me. There were other people she'd wronged. Her father abandoned in the nursing home, my neighbor who'd glimpsed it all, and remained silent, her sister who'd become a drunk mess from all the secrets, and Frank, who had lost a chance at a better position thanks to Elizabeth's cunning. One by one, I reached out to them. Quiet phone calls. At first, they were confused. Why was I calling them? What did I want? And each time, my answer was simple. I want you to come to the house. I need you to see something. I need us to talk. I never shouted, never pleaded. My tone must have told them I was serious. Because eventually, they all agreed, some with reluctance, some with relief. Then I visited her father at the nursing home. He looked so frail sitting by the window, the midday sun lighting up his white hair. I remembered how Elizabeth used to speak of him with a mix of respect and exasperation, calling him old-fashioned. But then she put him away, out of sight, because she didn't want to handle the responsibility. He recognized me with a tired smile. "Michael," he greeted. "I wondered if you'd come by." I tried to keep it cordial, but as I looked into his eyes, I saw the heartbreak he must have felt at being practically discarded by his own daughter. I told him quietly that I was assembling everyone she'd hurt, all in one place. I invited him. His lips tightened, a mix of sadness and shame, but eventually he nodded. "I'll come," he said, voice trembling. Maybe it's time we all faced our choices." And with that, the plan was set in motion. A week later, the day arrived, gray and thick with humidity. My home, once a place of warmth, felt more like a courtroom. 5 of us sat around the large kitchen table, saying little. The father in a wheelchair at one corner, the sister next to him, eyes bloodshot from who knows how many sleepless nights. My neighbor, arms folded, looking away in discomfort. Frank, stiff and uneasy, flicking imaginary dust off his sleeve. And me at the head of the table, watching the door. None of us spoke. None of us needed to. We had a shared understanding. Elizabeth Randall had hurt or used each person here. She had turned her back on them when they became inconvenient or no longer served her climb. There were no illusions left. When the door finally swung open and Elizabeth stepped inside, you could see her freeze in the doorway. She had her hair styled, wearing a sharp businesslike blouse and skirt, as though she'd come from an important meeting. For a split second, her confidence wavered, realizing she had walked into a silent ambush. She scanned the room, from her father's somber expression to her sister's tear-streaked face, then to the neighbor who glared but said nothing. Her gaze landed on Frank, who stared back without blinking. At last, her eyes fell on me. At the head of the table, I watched her posture, proud and unyielding, shift toward confusion, then discomfort, then the faintest glimmer of fear. I said nothing. None of us did. "Michael," she began, clearing her throat. "What's going on? Why is everyone here?" I let the silence do its work. Frank moved his gaze to the tabletop. The neighbor stared at the floor, stiff as a statue. The father didn't move at all. The sister swallowed hard, tears trembling in her eyes. Finally, Elizabeth let out a disbelieving laugh, though there was no humor in it. "What is this, some kind of intervention?" She looked at me again, hard. "You think humiliating me in my own home is the solution?" Still, I said nothing. I only reached into my pocket and placed the small packet of salt on the table in front of her. She recognized it. Her eyes flickered with sudden memory. She inhaled, and for a heartbeat, it looked like panic seized her, or maybe regret, or fury. With Elizabeth, it was impossible to know. "This is insane," she said in a cold, controlled tone. "You can't just summon me like I'm on trial. If you want to discuss a divorce, we can do it through lawyers." Frank exhaled slowly. The neighbor shifted in her chair. A sense of finality hung in the air. Nobody would defend her. Nobody would scold her, either. They were just done with her betrayals and half-truths. I cleared my throat, meeting her gaze. My words emerged quiet, drained of life, but resonating with a lethal calm. "Elizabeth Randall," I said, emphasizing her name, "you once asked me to carry that salt, so I'd never forget you. Here it is." She glanced at the white packet, then at me. "Michael, this is childish, if you're trying to make me." I cut her off. "Everyone who sees you now knows what you did. Not because we told them. Because of your silence. Because you gave us all no choice." I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to her father, her sister, then to the others. They each returned a look that said everything. She had lost all their respect. Her lip quivered. But in typical Elizabeth fashion, she drew herself up, eyes flashing defiance. "You don't get to judge me. You don't know what I've been through. None of you do." The father let out a quiet, painful sigh. I saw tears in his eyes, but he didn't speak. The sister choked back a sob. The neighbor, too, said nothing. They all just looked at her, one after another, letting that silent condemnation wash over her. No accusations needed, just knowledge. Elizabeth scowled, opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. She stared at me. I stared back. In that moment, the entire span of our marriage seemed to crystallize into a single, suffocating hush. A hush that said, "You betrayed all of us. You lost us." She took a step backward, nearly stumbling. Her usual grace was gone. Suddenly, it was as if she realized there was no victory to be found here. No one to cajole, to manipulate, to turn in her favor. She trembled, mouth working soundlessly, and I saw the slightest well of tears brimming in her eyes, whether from anger, shame, or shock. I couldn't tell. I spoke softly. "Now," I said, "get out." She stood, rigid, for a second. Then she grabbed her purse and strode out, slamming the door behind her. It rattled the window panes. None of us moved. We just let her leave. And that was it. We didn't look at each other. We didn't break down or cheer. It was just over. A heavy finality. I closed my eyes, listening to the echo of that slammed door. For the first time since she'd abandoned me, I felt the beginnings of a release, some deep knot in my gut loosening. After Elizabeth left, there was a strange hush in the house. The father's wheelchair squeaked as he turned toward me. "Thank you," he managed, voice raw. "Thank you for letting me face her, if only for a minute." Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm sorry, Michael." He stopped himself, realized words wouldn't help. We exchanged a faint nod. My neighbor, looking pale, stood up. "I should go," she said, an unspoken apology in her eyes. She understood she'd been complicit, in a sense, by staying silent. But there was no point in dwelling on it. She left quietly. The sister remained a moment longer, face streaked with tears and shame. She started to say something, stuttered, then sighed. "I'm sorry for everything," she finally managed. Then she pushed herself away from the table and guided her father outside to her car. That left me standing alone in the kitchen. I stared at the small packet of salt, lying there like a piece of evidence in a case that had just been dismissed. Once that salt had represented devotion, or maybe a playful vow. Now it was an emblem of betrayal. But I didn't feel triumph. It wasn't quite that. I felt unburdened. The rage that had simmered in me for so long no longer crawled beneath my skin. The humiliation still stung, but I knew I had my answer. I had confronted her in front of those she wronged. She saw the knowledge in their eyes, the confirmation that she wasn't fooling anyone anymore. I realized that revenge, in this sense, wasn't about retribution. It was about letting go. About showing her, and showing myself, that I wasn't going to crawl after her or rage blindly. She destroyed our marriage, but she wouldn't destroy me any longer. I took the salt packet, pressed it between my fingers. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, I tore it open and let the grains spill onto the table, tiny white crystals scattering. Tears, indeed. Tears and lies, dissolving into nothing. That was when my phone buzzed with a text. I picked it up. A name I didn't recognize. The number had been circulated along with the video, apparently. Another round of strangers or acquaintances poking at the story, looking for some drama to watch. I silenced the phone. I didn't need any more words. Everyone who mattered had seen enough. The next day, I woke early, feeling more at peace than I had in months. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went to see my father. He was in a nursing facility as well, though a different one from Elizabeth's father. I hadn't visited him much in the last several months, too consumed with my own confusion and heartbreak. But today, I wanted to connect with him, to remind myself of the family that had always stood behind me. When I arrived, I found him in his small room, dozing in front of a television. He looked older than I remembered, thinner. I felt a pang of guilt that I'd let so much time pass. He stirred, and his eyes landed on me. A look of surprise, then relief. "Michael, I thought you got lost or something." He tried to smile, though it came off a bit lopsided. I approached, took his hand gently. "I'm here, Dad." I noticed for the first time how frail his fingers felt. "Sorry it took me so long." His gaze softened, and he patted my hand. "It's never too late, son." We talked a while, about random things, sports results, old family jokes. I avoided telling him everything that happened, though I suspected he'd heard rumors. He didn't press. He knew me well enough to feel the tension in my voice. Slowly, I felt some part of me thawing. It was a small taste of normalcy, of unconditional acceptance. After an hour, I left him to rest, stepping out into the corridor. The facility smelled of antiseptic and watery coffee, the hush of staff members moving patients around. And I realized that some souls here, like Elizabeth's father and my own, had little left but the quiet swirl of time. The idea that Elizabeth abandoned her father to live in another man's arms stung me anew, but I set it aside. I couldn't let her cruelty define the rest of my days. In the following weeks, the legal steps toward divorce moved forward. Lawyers, documents, the usual back-and-forth negotiations. Elizabeth Randall tried to posture, threatened to take me for everything. But she had little leverage. Her father's voice, through an attorney, testified to her negligence. My sister provided her own perspective on Elizabeth's desertion. The company's HR record also quietly validated Frank's complaint against her from years ago. So eventually, she gave up the threats. She wanted it finished. I'd become less than nothing in her eyes, a weight dragging on her bright future with Thomas Reyes. It was through those proceedings that I learned more about their relationship. Thomas had posted more videos, some with Elizabeth in them, showing off vacations, fancy dinners. He made it look like a fairy tale romance. But from what I heard, they were living paycheck to paycheck. She was presumably still working, but there was no real affection or loyalty, just a swirl of infatuation. Maybe it suited them. I felt a flicker of pity. They'd discovered each other's illusions. Let them keep them. Meanwhile, life went on. I threw myself into my job, took extra assignments. My boss, who knew some of the story, politely avoided the subject. I appreciated that. A few of my coworkers tried to console me, but I told them I was fine. Because, oddly enough, I was. Yes, there were nights I felt an ache deep in my chest, remembering the laughter Elizabeth and I once shared. But that ache was overshadowed by relief. One bright Saturday morning, I drove to the small marina and approached my boat. I hadn't used it in months, not since the humiliating TikTok fiasco. I found it in sorry shape, battered by the elements and neglect. The sight stirred old memories. Elizabeth perched on the deck, smiling, throwing me a playful wink. She used to love the water, or so I believed. Now that entire image felt like a distant fantasy. I climbed aboard, spent the next few hours scrubbing, mending, polishing. With each brushstroke, I felt a weight lifting. Maybe it was the scorching sun overhead, or the sharp tang of salt water in the air, but I sensed a quiet energy stirring inside me. This boat had once been my escape, my therapy. I wouldn't let her memory contaminate it. By late afternoon, I'd cleaned away the grime. I untied the ropes and steered it out into open water. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. I drifted out to a spot near a small cove, cut the motor, and let the waves cradle the hull. The horizon was a blend of gold and blue, clouds drifting lazily. Seagulls circled overhead. I sat there, thinking of nothing in particular, until my phone buzzed. A text from Frank. "Just checking on you. You doing okay, buddy?" I smiled, typed back, "Yeah, better than okay." The seagulls cried overhead, and I let out a breath that seemed to carry away the last remnants of bitterness. I didn't want to be defined by revenge. I knew, deep down, that revenge, real revenge, wasn't about punishing Elizabeth Randall or Thomas Reyes. The moment she saw us all together at that table, silent, unafraid, was the exact moment she lost. That hush was heavier than any shouting match. That hush was us letting her go. I pulled out my fishing rod, cast a line into the water, and I thought about where my life would go from here. Maybe in time, I'd move to another city or buy a place near the ocean, make real on that old dream of being closer to nature. Maybe I'd save up and retire early, take care of my father with the dignity he deserved. The possibilities felt open, even if the path was uncertain. Months passed. The divorce was finalized. Elizabeth Randall's last name was removed from mine in every legal sense. She called me once, late at night, from a blocked number. I answered, half asleep, and heard her breathing. Then, "Michael, I." She paused, swallowing thickly. I waited, letting that silence grow. Part of me wondered if she was calling to lash out, or maybe to ask for forgiveness. But as the hush extended, I sensed she was searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, she hung up. No apology, no farewell, just the beep of a disconnected call. I stared at the phone, shook my head, and rolled over. I felt neither satisfaction nor regret. Just emptiness, and in that emptiness was a surprising serenity. One evening, I took my father out for a stroll near his care facility. He was feeling unusually energetic. The sun was setting, painting the sky with oranges and purples, a warm breeze carrying the scents of cut grass and distant flowers. We found a quiet bench by a small artificial pond. He looked at me with watery eyes. "Your mother would be proud of how you handled things," he said softly. I swallowed, nodded. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd say if she saw the mess I got into." He patted my knee. "We all have messes. It's how we get through them that matters." We sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the frogs croaking near the water. My mind drifted to that final confrontation with Elizabeth, how I'd said next to nothing, how she left in a swirl of anger. The entire arc of my marriage unraveled in that single day, but it also set me free. After my father went back to his room, I strolled outside again, breathing in the night air. For the first time, I let myself think about what Elizabeth once meant to me without feeling anger or sorrow. She was a part of my life for a long time. We had good moments. We built dreams. None of it was fake, at least not for me. But something in her changed, or maybe she was always that way, and I was too blind to see. Forgiveness. No, that was still off the table. I owed her nothing. My vow, "I will not forgive you," remained unwavering. But letting go of anger? Yes, I had done that. Because anger is still a bond, and I refused to be tied to her any longer. A few weeks later, I decided to host a simple barbecue in my backyard. I invited Frank, my sister, and a handful of friends I'd grown distant from during the madness of the last year. It was a small group, just enough to fill the yard with laughter and mild chatter. We grilled steaks, drank some cold beer, reminisced about simpler times. For a few hours, I felt like the old me, before Elizabeth's betrayal, before the illusions fell apart. Frank pulled me aside at one point, chewing on a piece of grilled corn. "You look different," he remarked, not unkindly. "Less weighed down, I guess." I took a sip of my beer, watching my sister show someone pictures on her phone. "I feel lighter," I said, turning to him with a wry half smile. "I'm still me, but I'm not carrying that baggage around anymore." He nodded, clinked his bottle against mine. "Here's to leaving baggage behind." I let the rest of the day pass in a contented haze, enjoying the warm presence of people who genuinely cared about me. As twilight fell and folks started heading home, I found myself alone in the backyard, gazing up at the silhouettes of trees against the dusky sky. I felt the old pang of memory, Elizabeth's presence in the house, her perfume lingering in the hall. But the pang was faint, overshadowed by a quiet peace. Then, one night, a call came from an unknown number. This time, the voice on the line was Thomas Reyes. I recognized it instantly from that tick-tock. Smooth, with a hint of arrogance, but right now it was tinted with something else. Nervousness. "Hey, man," he began, hesitating. "I know you probably hate me. I'd hate me too. But I'm calling because Elizabeth Randall, is in some trouble." I stayed silent, letting him talk. "She's left the job. She has these big ideas about traveling. We had a fight. She's short on funds, you know. Spent all her savings. I don't know, man. She said you might help, or that you might want to. Because you used to love her." I let out a low, almost lockless sigh. "And she's not with you anymore." He sighed in return. "She's around, but well, she does what she wants. Man, you know that. She told me she was headed to New York, might just show up at your place first. I'm just giving you a heads up, I guess." I clenched the phone. "Why are you really calling?" He let out a harsh chuckle. "Because I can't handle her anymore. I thought I could. Look, never mind. I'm out. She's all yours if you still want her." His voice cracked. "Good luck." He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone in disbelief. I felt no anger toward him, just pity. He had lured Elizabeth away with illusions of excitement, only to realize she was never the type to truly commit to anything or anyone that didn't keep her enthralled. She'd used him, the way she used me, used Frank, used her own family. I turned off the phone. If Elizabeth Randall was truly coming, she would find no sanctuary here. That was certain. She did show up 2 days later, out of nowhere. I'd just come home from work and found her standing in the driveway, a single suitcase by her feet, looking worn out and older than I remembered. Her hair was disheveled in a style that suggested a frantic journey. She tried to give me a weak smile, but I didn't return it. "Michael," she said, voice hoarse. I'm sorry to just appear like this. I need somewhere to stay, maybe just for a couple nights." I studied her face, searching for the old spark I once adored. It was gone, replaced by desperation. "Why here?" I asked coldly. She shrugged, tried to laugh, but it came out bitter. "Because you're my husband. Well, ex-husband, but we've been together so long. And we have a house. I thought maybe you'd." She wasn't finishing her sentences. I could see the brokenness behind her eyes, but I just stood there, expression blank. Finally, she exhaled. "Look, Michael, you know me. I'm not the best at apologies. But I'm in trouble. Thomas and it's not working. I left. I'm short on money. My job's gone. Do you have a couch I could crash on while I figure things out?" I felt a flicker of the old heartbreak, the memory of how many times I'd wanted to see her face, to hear her speak my name. But that flicker died instantly, replaced by the unstoppable truth. She had burned every bridge, humiliated me publicly, and then expected me to be a safety net. I stepped back. "You have no right to be here, Elizabeth Randall." She flinched at the sound of her full name, said with such finality. I kept my voice steady, cold. "I don't owe you anything. We're done." She tried to hold my gaze, but hers flicked aside. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've got nowhere else." I shook my head, the words coming out like a dull blade. "And whose fault is that?" A tear glistened in her eye. It was the first time I'd seen her cry in, maybe ever. Part of me felt a pang of sympathy. But I recalled how it felt watching that TikTok, hearing her moan another man's name on my boat. I recalled how she left her father to rot in a nursing home. How she lied about that salt packet meaning she'd be with me forever. I exhaled slowly, forced my voice to remain calm. "Elizabeth, you need to go. I can't help you. I won't." She opened her mouth, closed it again, tears now slipping down her cheeks. She gave a strangled sob, turned, and stumbled back to her suitcase. She stared at me a moment longer, as if hoping I'd change my mind. I didn't. After a painful beat, she dragged her suitcase down the street, disappearing into the encroaching dusk. I stood there until my lungs burned for air. Then I walked inside and locked the door. I didn't feel triumphant or cruel. I felt resolute, a sense that I was protecting my own life, my own future. I'd given her everything once: time, love, loyalty. She had twisted it, tossed it aside like garbage. Now her comeuppance was simply that I was no longer there to catch her. And that was that. Time continued to move, the weeks turning into months, a slow progression of normal life. My father's health held steady, and I spent more afternoons with him, pushing him through the gardens behind the facility. My sister visited more often, occasionally bringing homemade food and a kind smile. She said I looked better, more like myself. At work, I took new responsibilities and found myself surprisingly energized. I even reconnected with old friends, started going out for the occasional drink. Women at the bar asked about me, but I wasn't ready for that step yet. Maybe one day. I had no interest in rushing. I was savoring the quiet, letting my soul mend. One evening, I found myself rummaging through an old trunk in the attic. Inside was a wedding photo of Elizabeth Randall and me. She wore that radiant smile, her eyes full of dreams, or so I thought. I stared at my younger self, beaming with simple joy, as if the world was ours. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret. Then I gently placed the photo back. The past was the past, and I couldn't let it consume me. In the end, the story of Elizabeth Randall spread among our acquaintances. Some called her a manipulator, others simply called it a tragedy. I neither agreed nor disagreed. She had done what she'd done, and I had let her go. I had exacted my own brand of revenge, which was to stand firm and face her with silence. I had shown her that I wasn't her victim, that her actions had consequences. And so, life went on. Sometimes at night, I'd catch myself thinking about the day we confronted her. Me, her father in his wheelchair, her sister half-drunk on remorse, the neighbor with her folded arms, Frank simmering with old resentments, and how not a single word of condemnation was spoken. The hush was all it took. That hush was our testimony. That hush was our truth. I still keep the memory of that small salt packet. Even though I scattered the crystals across the kitchen table, I can picture them in my mind any time I want. The final reminder of a promise that was broken. Salt, like tears, like truth. In that silence, she finally understood. And so did I. I will not forgive you, Elizabeth Randall, but I will move forward. I'll find my own life, live it on my own terms, keep my dignity, and protect my heart. Mending doesn't mean forgetting, and it sure as hell doesn't mean forgiving. Mending is about standing on the shore, watching the tide carry away the wreckage of a broken promise. When the next wave rolls in, I'll be here, still breathing, still me. And that, in the end, is enough.